Rain falls sideways across the isolated streets of Blackwood, Washington. It does not wash the pavement clean. The downpour simply turns the soil into a sucking, black paste, dragging everything down into the dark. Tonight, the storm beats a chaotic, deafening rhythm against shattered glass. A jagged hole gapes in a ground floor window of a modest suburban home. Inside the bedroom, a television plays a muted late-night infomercial. The screen casts a pale, rhythmic blue flicker across the walls. Outside, a shadow shifts at the edge of the tree line. Wet gravel crunches under a heavy, rubber-soled boot. It is a slow, deliberate pivot. Someone is walking away into the timber. The figure leaves behind a profound, ringing silence. A void created by sudden violence, interrupted only by the distant, the crackling burst of a county dispatch channel miles down the road.
Unit 7, we're getting a noise complaint. Caller at the end of the block states they heard breaking glass. Maybe suppressed gunfire at the Vance residence. Proceed with extreme caution.
Marcus Vance will never hear the approaching sirens. He is 32 years old. To the postal worker and the neighbors, the man is merely a quiet resident who keeps his lawn manicured and his head down. Vance spent years carefully curating this unremarkable life. Desperate to bury the echoes of a past he could not outrun. Now, he lies perfectly still on his bedroom rug. The blue light from the television washes over his unblinking eyes. He rests in an awkward, broken posture, an interrupted motion, as if he had just turned to check the weather. A ceramic coffee mug sits untouched on the nightstand beside him. Steam has already stopped rising from the rim. 4 miles away, the killer's tires hiss against the wet asphalt. Silas Croft grips the steering wheel. Knuckles bleach white against the leather. A decade of obsessive, venomous retaliation hums in his veins. Croft believes he has executed a flawless operation. Conviction settles in his chest. The darkness has swallowed his sins. Back at the residence, cruiser tires finally slice through the deep puddles of the driveway. Red and blue strobes paint the dripping branches of the oak trees in harsh, unnatural colors. 2 patrolmen step out. Their heavy doors thud shut. Flashlights immediately cut through the heavy mist, erratic beams searching for a threat. They do not know about Silas Croft. The patrolmen know nothing of a 4-year-old vendetta or a secret murder. These officers only see the broken window. A radio crackles against a wet uniform collar.
Dispatch, this is 7. We got, a blown-out window on the east side of the structure. I don't see any movement inside. Drawing my weapon. I'm stepping into the yard.
The first responders' boots sink deep into the saturated lawn. Mud directly beneath the window frame is severely disturbed. Deep, overlapping gouges indicate someone stood right below the sill. The depression in the earth suggests the shooter stood there for a long time, waiting for the perfect angle. The officer drops his flashlight beam to the earth. Yellow light catches the unmistakable, dull metallic gleam of brass. 3 spent shell casings. They are scattered in the muck like carelessly tossed pennies. The patrolman exhales. A white plume of breath hangs in the freezing air. He reaches up, thumbing the mic on his shoulder.
We have casings, 3 of them, outside the master bedroom. Need an RA unit, step it up, and get the detectives out here right now. Nobody's answering the front door.
But the brass casings are not the anomaly. They are merely the expected debris of a fatal encounter. The officer takes half a step to the right, boots squelching in the mud. The beam of his flashlight sweeps past the casings, catching a reflection on a cheap black burner phone. It is half buried in the sludge. Rainwater pools on its cracked digital screen. Even with the phone, the scene remains tragically standard for a homicide. A shooting, a dropped piece of technology. Then, the beam stops. 8 inches from the concrete foundation of the house, resting atop a crushed bed of decorative ferns, is an object that defies all forensic logic. The officer squints. He wipes the freezing rain from his eyelashes and leans closer. Heavy drops drum relentlessly against his waterproof jacket. It is a root vegetable, a sweet potato, and this organic mass sits heavy, absurd, and entirely out of place in the garden bed. Both ends of the vegetable have been violently sheared off with a blade. Through the center, bored perfectly from end to end, is a charred, blackened tunnel. The edges of the flesh are deeply seared. A faint odor of sulfur, gunpowder, and burnt starch rises from the cavity. This piece of absolute madness rests in the dirt. A chaotic question mark dropped at the feet of the Blackwood police. The storm continues to fall, washing the mud, but it cannot wash away the impossible. That impossible object, a hollowed-out root vegetable reeking of sulfur, now sits inside a sealed, clear plastic evidence bag. Rainwater has been replaced by the sterile, flickering hum of the Blackwood County morgue. Marcus Vance rests on a slanted, grooved stainless steel table. His quiet life has ended in a blinding flash of violence, leaving behind only physical fragments for strangers to decipher. The omniscient eye hovers above the cold room. Investigators pace the linoleum floor. They are completely baffled by the organic mass recovered from the garden bed. A chief forensic technician adjusts the heavy magnifying arm over the examination tray. He lowers his masked face toward the trauma site on the victim. Tweezers pinch a microscopic, pale flake from the charred edges of the entry wound. The tech exhales a long, confused breath into his surgical mask. He slides a tray closer, dropping the fleck into a glass vial.
Detective? You're gonna want to see this. The entry wound, there's starch residue. And that vegetable from the yard, it's got gunpowder burned straight through the center cavity.
Starch, a completely mundane substance suddenly transformed into a forensic anchor. Detectives stare through the glass partition. The realization is slow, agonizingly absurd. Someone engineered an assassination using groceries. But while the morgue dissects the physical damage, the Blackwood precinct attempts to dissect digital ghosts. Across town, rain beats against the water-stained windows of the squad room. An evidence box rests on a scratched metal desk. Inside lies the cheap, black burner phone recovered from the sludge outside Vance's window. A junior investigator connects the device to a universal terminal. The cracked digital display flickers. A battery icon pulses weakly in the dim room. Fingers dance across a mechanical keyboard. The investigator runs the SIM registration data through the regional database. A name finally populates on the glowing monitor. It is not a local criminal. The registry does not point to an angry ex-colleague or neighbor. The phone is registered to Julian Thorne. He is a phantom. Julian Thorne is the ruthless, fictional kingpin from a highly rated premium cable syndicate drama. To the average citizen, it is just television trivia. To the omniscient observer, it is a glaring window into the killer's mind. Silas Croft sat in a darkened living room miles away, absorbing televised violence, and dragged it kicking and screaming into reality. A tired detective leans over the junior investigator's shoulder. Coffee spills slightly over the rim of a paper cup as he squints at the monitor. He pauses. The man blinks, his mind connecting the fictional identity on the screen to the absurd piece of evidence sitting in the morgue's refrigerator.
Julian Thorne. Are you kidding me? That's the guy from that mob show. Wait. Season 3. The hit in the alleyway. The enforcer used a sweet potato on the barrel of a 9mm.
A pop culture breadcrumb. The chaotic question mark begins to straighten into a sinister line. The killer mimicked a screenwriter's imagination to silence his weapon. This methodology is no longer a mystery. They know exactly how Marcus Vance was executed in his own bedroom. They understand the starch in the wound. Yet, the knowledge provides no immediate comfort. The omniscient camera pulls back, leaving the precinct behind. Somewhere in the sprawling outskirts of Blackwood, Silas Croft sleeps soundly. He believes his tracks are washed away. He assumes his television-inspired cleverness has outsmarted the badge. The police have a burned vegetable and a fake name. Fingerprints on the phone were destroyed by the heavy downpour. The organic matter of the makeshift silencer is already beginning to break down at a cellular level inside the precinct's evidence locker. The connection between the fictional crime boss and the real-world murder weapon is undeniable. However, a massive gap remains. Starch and television trivia do not equal an arrest warrant. The identity of the phantom mimic is still buried deep within the bureaucratic maze. Blackwood investigators possess the anatomy of the crime, but the true face of the architect remains entirely in the shadows. The true face of that architect remains entirely in the shadows, obscured by rain and a mountain of red tape. Blackwood detectives know exactly what happened inside Marcus Vance's bedroom, but knowing the mechanics of a murder cannot close a file. Finding starch and television trivia only creates a compelling theory. Theories do not hold up in a court of law. Weeks dissolve into months. Dust slowly settles across the manila folders stacked high on the precinct desks. Winter thaws into a muddy spring, yet the investigation remains frozen. This delay is not for a lack of a target. Silas Croft is brought into the sterile interview room less than 48 hours after the shooting. Investigators are acutely aware of the bad blood between the two men. 4 years prior, a close associate of Croft's was killed in an unresolved dispute, and Silas always held Vance secretly responsible. Hatred of that magnitude does not simply evaporate. It festers in the dark, evolving into a quiet, obsessive paranoia. Detectives sit across the scarred metal table. The interrogators aggressively present this history, laying out the undeniable motive. Our omniscient camera watches Croft's heart rate remain perfectly, infuriatingly steady. He leans back in the uncomfortable folding chair. A faint, arrogant smirk plays at the corners of his mouth. The man is not sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights because he possesses an electronic shield. Croft casually extends his right leg. A bulky black plastic ankle monitor is strapped securely above his scuffed work boot. This device is a strict court-ordered tether stemming from a previous, unrelated conviction. The hardware is designed to track his every physical movement across the county. According to the state monitoring agency, Silas never left his living room on the night Vance was executed. The lead detective taps a cheap ballpoint pen against the table, visibly frustrated by the digital contradiction. Croft shifts his weight, the heavy plastic of his monitors scraping audibly against the metal chair leg.
I don't know what you're talking about, man. Check the bracelet. I was home. I couldn't have gone anywhere without that alarm tripping. You got absolutely nothing on me.
The suspect walks out the heavy glass doors of the Blackwood precinct. He steps into the crisp afternoon air, an untethered man. Inside the building, the case rapidly collapses under the weight of bureaucratic failure. Warrants are filed to audit the GPS monitoring company's raw data. The returned logs are hopelessly convoluted. Server migrations and dropped satellite pings create massive digital blind spots. The tracking technology of the era is simply too primitive to definitively override his alibi. The agency refuses to formally place him at the crime scene. Forensic science offers no salvation either. The muddy garden bed outside Vance's window yielded a completely ruined environment. Constant rainwater degraded any superficial surface DNA left on the makeshift, hollowed-out silencer. The state laboratory sends back a conclusive, devastating report. There is insufficient organic material for a viable genetic profile. Time begins to bleed away. The calendar pages turn endlessly. 1 year becomes 5. 5 years fade into 10. The Blackwood Department undergoes massive personnel turnover. Veteran detectives retire, taking the bizarre memory of the sweet potato and the fictional television mobster with them. The physical evidence box is sealed with red tape and relegated to a deep, subterranean storage facility. Marcus Vance becomes a forgotten statistic, buried beneath a decade of fresh, urgent case files. Silas Croft spends the next 12 years living comfortably. He moves freely through the county, utterly convinced of his own untouchable genius. The man genuinely believes he beat the system. He assumes the heavy rain washed away his sins permanently. However, the science does not remain stagnant. Technology quietly sharpens its teeth in the shadows. Deep in the forgotten archives, the organic material locked inside the vacuum-sealed evidence bag is waiting. A new generation of machines is preparing to wake it up. A new generation of machines does precisely what the investigators of the past could not. Inside a hyper-sterile, brightly lit state laboratory, microscopic fragments of that hollowed-out root vegetable finally surrender their secrets. 12 years ago, the relentless rainwater degraded the surface cells, turning the genetic material into an illegible smear. Today, advanced genomic sequencing reconstructs that biological debris with clinical perfection. The digital readout on the lab monitor blinks a steady, rhythmic green, a flawless, indisputable match. Silas Croft. Armed with this undeniable biological anchor, a specialized cold case unit pivots toward the digital ghost that protected him. Analysts crack open the archived, corrupted data logs from the state monitoring agency. They untangle the obsolete code, line by agonizing line. Suddenly, the GPS coordinates from that rainy night crystallize. The ankle monitor did not place Croft in his living room. A satellite ping, hidden deep within a server migration error, pinpoints his exact location at precisely 10 o'clock. He was standing squarely in the mud outside Marcus Vance's bedroom window. The trap snaps shut. A pair of plainclothes detectives pick up Silas outside a local Blackwood hardware store. He is older now. His hairline is receding, but the familiar arrogance still clings to his broad shoulders. Croft rides in the back of the unmarked sedan with an infuriating calm. He assumes this is a clerical error. The man genuinely believes his 12-year-old alibi remains absolutely bulletproof. Blackwood Precinct's interrogation room B smells strongly of industrial floor cleaner and stale, burnt coffee. Nana Croft sits at the metal table, casually adjusting his posture. He crosses his arms. Silas is waiting for the same tired questions about a decade-old grudge. Instead, the lead detective walks in carrying a single, thin manila folder. There are no towering stacks of paperwork. There is no bluster. The investigator slowly slides a high-resolution color photograph across the scratched aluminum surface. It shows the makeshift vegetable silencer resting in the dirt. Beside the photo, the detective places a pristine, printed DNA sequencing report. Finally, a digitally enhanced map drops onto the table. The paper is marked with a singular, glaring red dot representing the ankle monitor's true location. Our omniscient camera zooms in on the suspect. Croft's dark eyes dart from the genetic data to the map. His pupils dilate violently. The steady, relaxed rhythm of his pulse visibly derails, throbbing against the skin of his neck. The invisible shield he wore for a decade shatters into 1,000,000 jagged pieces. He stares at the photograph of the organic anomaly he crafted from a fictional television show. Sweat instantly beads along his brow. Croft leans forward. His voice becomes a strained, hollow whisper, breaking against the absolute silence of the room.
But that's impossible. It's been 12 years. That's not my DNA. You're making this up. I didn't leave anything in that mud.
The omniscient view revels in his collapsing reality. Croft accidentally confirms his presence in the muck before the detectives even ask a single question. He actively mentions the mud. The lead investigator does not shout or slam his fists in triumph. He simply leans back against the cinder block wall, watching the suspect suffocate on his own decaying arrogance. Every ounce of Silas's power evaporates into the harsh fluorescent light overhead. He realizes the television-inspired masterpiece was his ultimate undoing. The phantom mimicry trapped him. If he had used a standard metal suppressor or wrapped a heavy pillow around the barrel, the rain might have truly washed his sins away forever. By choosing the absurd, he provided the state laboratory with a perfect, starchy sponge. The hollowed-out vegetable absorbed his sweat, his skin cells, and his damning presence. It held on to his identity patiently. The evidence waited in a dark locker for the future to arrive. Croft slumps back in the uncomfortable folding chair. Heavy steel handcuffs clink softly against the metal table. The phantom kingpin is finally dead, replaced by an aging man caught in an inescapable box. That inescapable box extends far beyond the cold aluminum table. It stretches all the way into the polished oak and fluorescent-lit aisles of the Blackwood County Courthouse. Silas Croft traded a plastic chair for a defendant's bench, but the invisible walls remained exactly the same. The phantom kingpin narrative was utterly dead. A jury of his peers needed less than 4 hours to dismantle a 12-year-old lie. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The gavel strikes the wooden block with a sharp, echoing crack. A bailiff moves forward, placing a heavy hand on Croft's shoulder. The aging man does not fight. His eyes are blank, staring vacantly at the prosecutor standing behind the mahogany podium. He breathes in shallow, defeated gasps. She adjusts her microphone. The fluorescent light catches the silver rim of her glasses as she surveys the silent, crowded room.
The defendant, he really thought he was a mastermind. He watched a late-night crime drama, crafted a makeshift silencer, and assumed the rain would just swallow his secrets. But the earth remembers. It held on to the truth, and his DNA remained.
Earth does remember. The soil is an unforgiving archivist. To truly understand the weight of that verdict, we must rewind the clock. The omniscient camera pulls away from the courthouse, drifting backward through a decade of lost time. We return to that fateful, stormy night. Rain begins to fall sideways across the isolated streets. Inside a dim, cluttered living room, Silas Croft sits alone. The glow of a premium cable television screen washes over his rigid face. A 4-year-old hatred boils quietly in his chest. He believes Marcus Vance is an untouchable monster who escaped justice. Vengeance demands blood, but cowardice requires silence. On the television, a fictional enforcer screws a hollowed-out root vegetable onto the barrel of a pistol. Croft leans forward. Adrenaline causes his hands to tremble slightly as he grips the armrest. He stands up, walking into his cramped kitchen. A drawer rattles open. Metal scrapes against wood as he retrieves a long, serrated carving knife. He grabs a sweet potato from a wire basket on the stained counter. The blade pierces the rough skin. He twists the steel, slowly carving out the core. Starch flakes fall onto the cracked linoleum floor. He is meticulously engineering reality to match a scriptwriter's imagination. An hour later, wet gravel crunches beneath his heavy, rubber-soled boots. He stands in the deep mud outside Marcus Vance's bedroom. Cold precipitation lashes against his dark, waterproof jacket. Croft raises his weapon. The modified vegetable is jammed awkwardly over the muzzle. Through the glass, Vance is completely unaware. The 32-year-old father is simply existing, resting in his own private sanctuary. He did not ask for this execution. The trigger breaks. A muffled, hollow pop echoes through the storm. Glass fractures into 1,000 jagged spiderwebs. Vance falls instantly, collapsing out of the frame. The deed is done. Panic suddenly grips the killer. The improvised silencer splits apart violently from the expanding gas of the gunshot. Charred, organic matter burns his bare fingers. Croft drops the ruined vegetable directly into the saturated flower bed. He turns and flees into the timber, abandoning the absolute madness in the dirt. The omniscient view lingers on the discarded weapon. Rainwater pools in the blackened cavity, mixing with the starchy debris. Art and reality collided in this patch of earth. A man watched a television show, absorbed its fictional violence, and used it to extinguish a human life. And the medium designed to entertain became an instructional manual for murder. Silas Croft will spend the rest of his natural life behind steel bars. The Blackwood police finally closed their coldest file. Marcus Vance received a measure of delayed justice. Yet, the unsettling truth remains long after the cell doors lock. Millions of screens flicker in dark living rooms every single night. Countless shadows sit silently in the blue glow, watching, learning, and taking notes. The true dread is never what happens on the screen. It is what happens when someone decides to turn off the television and walk out into the rain